Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Dhamma
Sambuddhasa.
mute your mics. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. I'll recite the 5 precepts. Panatipata veramani sikapadang samadhiyami. Adinnadana veramani sikapadang samadhiyami. Kame sumitrachara veramani sikapadang samadhiyami. Musawada veramani sikapadang samadhiyami. Sura mirya majjapamadattana veramani sikapadang samadhiyami. Say sadhu 3 times. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, Dhamma friends, welcome all of you to this third Dhamma talk in this series. And for those who may not have been here in the last talk, we were talking on, I went over the 3 levels of suffering. We were starting with the first noble truth, and talked about the 3 levels of suffering. The suffering of the body, the physical level, and the suffering of the mind in terms of not getting what you want, getting what you don't want, and all the problems and worries that brings. And then the last subtler level of the suffering that the Buddha defined as the 5 aggregates of clinging are suffering. And basically, the 5 aggregates of clinging, as most of you know, comprise all the aspects of our body and mind. But I also call that level the level of suffering that comes from ignorance, is not understanding these 5 aggregates and allowing our mind and body to get all intricately enmeshed and entwined with the law of karma that brings back, painful and suffering experiences of body and mind because of, our unskillful thought, speech, and actions. And it's because we haven't understood the nature of this mind. And, the mind is basically what creates the world. There's the first 2 verses of the Dhammapada, as I have mentioned so many times, that all actions are led by the mind. Mind is their master. Mind is their maker. Act or speak with an impure mind, and suffering follows, as the cartwheel follows the foot of the ox. And in the same way, if one acts or speaks with the pure state of mind, then happiness follows, as your shadow follows you around. So in another important discourse or statement of the Buddha, that the world, the arising of the world, the ceasing of the world, and the path leading to the ceasing of the world is right within this 5 or 6 foot long body with its feelings, nervous system, memory, and consciousness. And I want to, that's what I want to talk a little bit more about today, is the 5 aggregates of clinging. Because almost all of the teachings of the Buddha revolve around learning how to understand and observe these aspects of our body and mind, and the practices of meditation are about learning how to restrain or control the negative actions of our body, speech, and mind, so that we attain a more stable and continuous state of well-being. That means free from guilt, worry, remorse, and fear, and anxiety that's produced by our unmindful, unskillful thoughts and actions. And I want to talk more about the mind itself, because it's something that's not talked about very much in Western psychology, or even in school, in our learning, unless you take some courses in psychology or psychotherapy. The average person is never really taught about their mind. What is their mind? The main focus is on what is the material world, and how can we develop the material world and enjoy and exploit the material world to satisfy our greed and desires, and seeking more and more comfort and so on. But very little attention is paid to the mind. So that's where the Buddha. Please mute your mics, please, so I won't hear you. So the mind, basically, there's 2 aspects of the mind. One is, well, there's many aspects of the mind, but the thing we normally call mind is comprised of consciousness, and then the mental activities, or the mental contents of consciousness, which are feeling, perception, volition, which includes our thoughts, and the objects that come through our senses. But basically, the feeling and the perceptions, which are the pictures of the physical objects of our senses, sort of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, and touching, and so on, the mental pictures and ideas that arise from these sensory impingements as perceptions, and then our reactions to them, and then the consciousness. And within that mental process arises the whole world, as I mentioned in that gatha. But the average person, really knows nothing about that. But most of the teachings of the Buddha revolve around trying to understand that, and especially in the practice of meditation. So in the practice of meditation is almost totally focused on developing the powers of our mind. That means mindfulness, concentration, and the wisdom that comes out of mindfulness and concentration, in order to really understand this mind and how it creates the world. So I wanted to go through these 5 aggregates I don't know if we get through all of them, but because it's very important, especially those, I know most of you are practicing meditation. So understanding the 5 aggregates is really the whole focus of insight meditation, and especially the practice of vipassana meditation. So again, the 5 aggregates are listed as material forms, then feelings, perceptions, volitions or reactions, and consciousness. And the mind is like these are like a 5-layered cake. So you could, picture if you can visualize a 5-layered cake. Let's say, remember back to your wedding if you had a 5-layered wedding cake, or even if you didn't. But so the top one is the smallest one. Underneath that, each lower level gets is a little bit larger, and then the lower level is usually the largest one. So anyway, the material world is probably the bottom layer, but it is it could be the top layer too. But the material world includes our body, this physical body, but it's not limited to that. It also refers to all the physical sensory stimulus in the material world. So all sight, sound, smells, and tastes belong to the material world, but especially this body. And the Buddha defined the material forms as being comprised of the 4 great elements, or the 4 elements of earth, fire, water, and air. Sometimes the space in consciousness is also included, but the 4 primary elements of earth, fire, water, and air, these are not like elements that you find in the chemistry, in the big chart on elemental properties. But I like to explain them as basically vibrations. So whenever we feel something, the only thing that we can actually feel is a vibration. Like, for example, right now, just close your eyes and feel where your buttocks are pressing your seat. And what do you actually feel? What can you actually feel coming through your senses? If you call it my buttocks, that's a thought in your mind. That's not what's coming through your senses. Or even if you open your eyes and you see the image on your screen, that is just a bunch of color vibrations, coming to your eye, but the mind might create an image and call it Bhante Rahula. But what's actually coming through the senses are just vibrations. So actually, the way we experience the world is through these vibrations. And all those vibrations have a corresponding feeling or sensation. They give off a sensation, or a vibration. So whenever you feel the body, that's just a sensation that's coming through your nervous system, and it is felt as being something pleasant or painful or neutral. But we're going to focus primarily on the painful and the pleasant sensations, because those are the ones that affect us the most in our life. And our whole world basically revolves around these types of feelings that arise. So anyway, I know might seem a little bit difficult for you to understand, or it might seem intellectual, but if you're practicing mindfulness meditation, if you're practicing the 4 foundations of mindfulness, or you're practicing Vipassana meditation, understanding the nature of how our mind works, it's really the key for understanding how illusions or delusions arise, especially illusions of the solidity of objects. So anyway, so the material aggregate is the thing that how we experience the world through the senses. So the world is coming through the senses, creating all of these vibrations. And again, these vibrations are experienced as either painful or pleasant or neutral, but especially the painful or pleasant ones. And so this comes to the level of feelings, so that the mind basically it's reacting to the pleasurable and painful feelings that arise. Now I'm going to go back a little bit to the talks of, I think, in the first or the last Dhamma talk I gave, the example of when a baby is born. A baby is born basically without any thoughts in its mind. And its mind is very expanded and oceanic. It's not identified with itself or others. And it has a more open kind of non-dual awareness. But it's still, feeling things. And it hasn't developed any thoughts or memory to the world yet. But it gradually learns that, especially when it has it experiences a pleasurable feeling when it goes to get milk from the mother. Or maybe the grandmother comes by and gives it a sweet. And so the baby tastes the chocolate for the first time. And that produces a pleasurable feeling in its mind. And then it starts to like that pleasant feeling. It identifies the face of the grandmother with pleasurable feeling. And then it starts hoping that the grandmother, that face comes again expecting that it will get pleasurable feeling again. Or with the mother, gets a pleasurable feeling from being close to the mother, taking milk from the mother. And so it has that affinity towards the mother. But somebody else who comes and maybe squeezes the baby too tightly and causes it some discomfort or pain, it might see that face as something it doesn't like, that gives it a painful feeling. And so it starts to identify that person with painful feeling and hoping that that person won't come again in the future. And so and that is how the past and the future are born in the mind, with all the different sense objects. If you see something that produces a pleasurable feeling, then we want that pleasurable feeling again. And if we experience something that causes us a painful feeling, we don't want that object again in the future. But all these feelings are basically connected with those vibrations coming through the senses. And the young baby doesn't even know how to really, give them names or labels, only when it learns its language. And that's when the perceptions arise. So every object that we've ever experienced in our life, from the time we were, a baby, and then learning language, we start to identify, oh, these objects are objects that bring me pleasure, and I want them, and these objects are ones that bring me pain, and I would not want them, or to get away from them. And those perceptions or mental images, they get solidified in the mind. But actually, there are, basically they're just vibrations. And the more we focus on an object, the more real it appears to be. And I want to give the example of a photograph that you're all familiar with. So a photograph. Take a photograph, the clarity of the photo depends on how many pixels the photograph contains. If you have a good camera with a high pixel rate, the picture becomes very clear. But when you enlarge that photo, then it gets distorted and the pixels kind of come apart. When you enlarge the photo, those pixels are no longer super compressed. They start to come apart and the photo distorts. And if you keep on doing that, enlarging it more and more, at some point you can no longer discern what's in the photo. And that's because of the enlargement and seeing the spaces between the pixels. So whenever we're focused on an object, then that's like focusing the camera lens onto an object to bring it into clear focus. The longer we're staring at something. And then that's just what also triggers off our memories of the object and brings in our desires and aversions based on that. But if we don't allow those pixels, if we don't allow our mind to dwell on a particular object, then the mind doesn't pay attention to it too much, and that object would kind of just vanish into the background, or we get distracted and focus on something else. So again, I'm just explaining this to try to understand how the mind is operating, and it's very much like that. So the material aggregate, the material vibrations, again, the earth, fire, water, and air are 4 elements. Like when you squeeze the body, if you take your hand and squeeze your arm, okay, you feel that hardness or solidity in your arm. Feels like it's solid. So that's why it's called the earth vibration. And or even where your buttocks are pressing the seat, that's called we call that the earth vibration, because basically it's just a vibration. But that memory is unique, and that vibration is unique in the mind. The mind has stored the meaning of that vibration in the unconscious. And because of language, we say, that's my buttocks pressing the seat, or that's my feet pressing the floor, or that's my right hand touching the left hand. So those are perceptions or mental memories of the original just vibration that was coming through the senses. Now we need that process to really, to communicate and so on. So there's nothing really wrong with that process, but we take those objects to be something that's absolutely real and and standing out in time and space. But actually that process is being created within the mental process, and it doesn't necessarily correspond with the actual reality that we're seeing outside. So this is how the five aggregates are all kind of, they come together to form our mental experience. That the material stimulus coming through the senses is necessary to trigger the mind into activity. And because of the material stimulus, it creates this feeling, pleasant or painful feeling. And then that triggers off the memory of that feeling and the name of the object, name of that object associated with the feeling. And so we think it's the object that we want. Or we say, oh, that's a pain in my body. And then, you know, I don't like that pain in my body. And then we try to get away from it, like scratching an itch, or changing your posture if you're experiencing pain. It's because you're identifying that sensation with my body. And then this body belongs to me. We'll get into that a little later. But we're just trying to learn and understand how this process is gradually growing within the mind, although it happens very, very rapidly, but we don't see the process developing in the mind. So, and normally but basically our mind lives for pleasurable and painful feeling. And we think that it's the objects of the world that we are liking or disliking. We say, I like this object, I dislike this object. It's because the object produces a pleasurable feeling in you, so the mind says, I like it. And if the object produces a painful feeling in you, then normally you'd say, I don't like it. And we're caught in a tug of war between the pleasurable and painful feeling, seeking out the pleasurable feelings and to get away from the painful feelings. Now, normally we say we like the object, but it's not really the object that we want. It's the feeling that the object is delivering to us that we want. So we say we like a particular object, let's say a certain person, because that person, has produced pleasurable feelings in you, pushes all the right buttons. And so as long as they're doing things that please you, you say you like that person. But if the person starts doing things that cause pain to you, you may tolerate it for a while, but maybe at some point you might start disliking that person and want to totally get away from that person, as we know so well, for an example, in the divorce situations. So this is very important to understand, especially for meditators or for anybody, but especially in terms of our meditation practice. And in the world in general, that's how people get attached to objects. They think it's the object that they want, but actually it's the feeling that the object produces on them that we want. And that's why we get tired of objects after a while. The mind gets bored. So you get an object, you use it for a while, whatever it might be, maybe listening to certain songs, certain visible objects, smells, tastes. And either we might get bored with them or those objects might stop producing those same kind of feelings in us. And so our attitude toward those objects will change. And so that shows you that really no object in itself necessarily is inherently good or bad or pleasurable or painful. It depends on the sensations that it happens to produce in you as whether you're going to have attachment to it or aversion to it or fight over it or even kill over it. And we'll see that no two people are the same. That you can put an object out in front of 10 different people like a type of a food. And you go around and ask everybody in that circle if they like the food. And maybe one person might say, oh, that's my favorite food, I really love that. The next person might say, well, you know, it's okay, you know, it's not my favorite. And then, you know, and it'll go on like that, and somebody else says, no, I hate that stuff. You know? And so that shows you that it's not in the food itself that some absolute good quality or bad quality taste or smell. It depends on an individual's past experience with that object. But yet people will fight and argue over the meaning of objects, but it's just the, you know, that the feeling that has arisen, but we identify it with the object. And then, you know, allow it to cause us problems. For example, let's say you got two people in a museum or an art gallery, and they're looking at some beautiful, you know, Rembrandt painting, or maybe it's Van Gogh or any other artist. And one person might say, "Oh, that artist is, you know, the best in the world. That's my favorite painting. I mean, that's the best painting there is." And you know, some guy, the stranger next to him, you know, overhears him and said, it's a piece of junk, you know, or that's, you know, some negative comment. And then they start getting into an argument, right? So it's the same thing they're looking at, right? They're looking at the same thing, yet they interpret it in different ways in terms of the feeling that it produces in them. And I know some of you who've been on my retreats in the past, you've heard my avocado story. I'm just going to repeat it again because it's very illustrative in this context. From my own personal experience, I suffered, and this helped me actually to understand the nature of this strong attachment to objects and feelings. So when I was a young boy living in California, we lived near an avocado orchard. And for some reason, I didn't like avocados. I kind of hated their taste. But my mother, being a good mother, she used to serve avocados for dinner 2 or 3 times a week because she knew that they were a good, healthy fruit. And even nowadays, you know, and avocados are becoming very popular, and then on the list of the 10 healthiest fruits or vegetables, avocados is #1 on many lists now. Before we didn't even know that, but anyway, so I really hated the avocados. So whenever my mother told me we're having avocados for dinner, a kind of a chill went up my spine, just hearing the word avocado. And then for the next couple hours, I'd be worried, oh, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? But we had a cat that liked avocados. So I used to go and collect the cat and bring him inside the house around mealtime. And he used to sit underneath the table near my feet. And then when my mother brought me the avocados and I saw them, another chill went up my spine. And then when I actually brought the avocado close to smell it, sometimes I would, you know, gag. And when I actually put it into my mouth and chewed it, I would gag more and sometimes even have to spit it out because I really thought avocados were evil and I didn't like that taste. But my father and brother and mother, they were wolfing down the avocados, you know, they really liked them. So I thought, how can they like this stuff, you know? But my mother made me finish the dinner, you know, before I could go and watch television afterwards. This was back in the late 50s, early 60s, when people only had one television in the house. It was in the den. And so everybody would have to go in there and watch it. But when they left, I fed the rest of the avocados to the cat. For some reason, he liked them. And then I would take my plate in and show my mother, look, Ma, I finished my dinner. And she would say, ah, good little boy. So what did I do? What did I do in that instance? I told a lie to my own mother. Can you believe that? Told a lie to my mother. So that's the point. We cling to our ideas of this is good, this is bad, I don't like this, I like this, when actually we've self-created it in our mind, and it will lead us to doing unskillful actions. Like telling lies, it could be worse. People have killed over quarreling about, you know, their favorite their music or so many other things. Any attachment, even attachment to religion, political philosophies. And it's simply because of these, what are essentially just empty vibrations coming through the ear, the eyes, and nose, the tongue, but our mind through past experience and influence of society, and maybe even coming from past life experiences, we've you know, learned to perceive them and react to them in different ways. And basically, most people don't know how to get out of that. They're stuck in these mental ruts. And actually, those ruts are called sankharas. Now, that's not the end of the story. I'll tell you the good part of the story, okay, about the avocados. So later, when I went to India and I started to practice yoga and meditation, I went to the yoga ashram, and the yoga master was extolling the virtues of avocados, saying how they were one of the best, healthiest fruits. And then I was also learning meditation and learning about, you know, how the mind creates illusions and attachments. And so I thought, I'm going to experiment with this, see if I can change my attitude toward avocados. So I got a bag of avocados and started to slowly eat them. First, I'd have to mix it with some other food and hold my nose, you know. And initially, I gagged a couple of times, but I kept on telling myself, it's all in the mind, it's all in the mind. Avocados are good. And so I tried to relax around them and just let those sensations kind of come and go, and gradually I could tolerate them more. And little by little, I could take my hand off my nose and just chew them. And little by little, I could stop mixing it with other food. And then finally, after a couple of weeks, I could eat the avocado plain without having any serious kind of bad reaction. And over time, I became to like avocados. And now I love avocados. So people bring down here, you know, I like avocados, so we get quite a lot of avocados coming here. Not during this pandemic time so much. So anyway, that was just a story to illustrate. But that was a very good experience for me to learn that I could change my mind about avocados that caused me so much suffering for, you know, many years of my life. And so if you can change your mind about avocados, you can also change your mind about a lot of other things, even a pain in your neck, or an itch on your face, or some unpleasant words that somebody might be throwing at you, or so many other situations. So it's it's important to understand that process of sensory stimulation, then the feeling that's produced from it, and then the perceptions. That means the mental pictures and memory that's being recreated from the unconscious mind, being recreated each time you hear that same vibration. Mind matches up that vibration just like a computer or Google is matching up, letters and words that you're punching into the thing and then projecting that onto the screen. Even if you type in the first 3 letters of a word, the computer is second guessing you and throwing out 4 or 5 possibilities of what that object is that, guessing what you're going to finish typing so that you don't have to type so much. So our mind is also doing that. And so part of the mindfulness and vipassana meditation is to observe that process. Of course, it's not that easy to do in the beginning. But so far, that's how basically the world has been created, the world of individual objects. And this process is happening millions of times in the snap of a finger. This process of the mind coming and going and creating the mental process is happening within the mind, and that's why normally we cannot see it because it happens too quickly. And then, so far I've been talking about 3 of those 5 aggregates. The 4th one is the reactions. So far we've got the material stimulus that sets up the vibration in the nervous system. The mind notices it or reacts to it as being something pleasant or painful, and then remembers it, gives it a name and an object, and then the memory comes out. Oh, last week this happened to me and I got a painful feeling, and so you don't want that to happen again, so you start reacting. So the reactions are called the sankharas. So we react to the feeling and the perception. And that is where the karma takes place also. So the sankharas, the aggregate of sankhara kanda, is the sort of the repository of all the kind of reactions, which includes our thoughts and emotions that we've been accumulating and practicing our whole life towards the various objects that we come into contact with on a daily basis, and that we form these strong habits. Every time you react to a stimulus, such as an itch, when an itch arises, you immediately kind of want to scratch it, hoping you're going to get rid of that uncomfortable, unpleasant feeling. Because that's why most people itch and scratch things, because it's producing an unpleasant feeling and they're thinking it's going to last for a long time. So they immediately want to quickly get rid of it. They think it's permanent. And so they want to remove it quickly. But every time they react, either with aversion or attraction, it strengthens the habit. It strengthens that sankhara. And it kind of goes back down into the unconscious mind. And then the next time a similar situation arises, that sankhara just pops right back up as an automatic reaction without requiring you to think about it. And that's how we keep on repeating the same habits over and over again. So that's the aggregate of sankharas, the whole aggregates the whole collection or accumulation of these habit reactions, and then, you know, which includes the urge to do things with our body. You know, and that's basically how our life continues. So until those habit patterns are interrupted, then you'll go on keep repeating the same types of habits of and also habits of thought and habits of speech and habits of, you know, the way we use our body. And then, because a lot of those are unwholesome, you know, if we can't get lawfully the objects of our pleasurable sensations or the objects of our desire and greed, then people will resort to unwholesome actions, like, you know, harming people, killing, lying, cheating, stealing, you know, gossiping, telling tales about others, intoxicating their minds, and you know, all the unwholesome karmas. And it's simply because people are caught in those habits and they don't have any way to overcome them. Now there's one more aggregate we're going to talk about, but it's a very big subject, and so I probably will go into that in more detail in another talk, but is the consciousness. So consciousness is basically, you know, has many dimensions to it, but in this sense, it's the feeling of the I. And consciousness is basically the light of the mind. It's the knowing faculty. It's that which allows us to experience the world. Because when you go unconscious, consciousness is no longer functioning. When you go to sleep, you become not conscious of your immediate world around you, because somehow the senses have shut down, and you need the sensory stimulation to be conscious. But during sleep, somehow that is interrupted, and so you have dreams, which are basically images from the unconscious mind, not the conscious mind. So the consciousness is that which allows us to experience things. But what we experience is the feeling, the perception, and the volition. But along with this consciousness comes a sense of I am conscious, or I am the experiencer. I'm the one that's hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, liking, disliking these objects, that sense of self. And I mentioned this, I think, in the last talk about how that sense of self initially arose. You know, as I mentioned also just shortly ago, when the baby's born, it doesn't have a sense of I or me in it. Because it starts focusing the external world, and it starts getting all this attention shown to it. The feeling of an I starts to grow within the baby's mind. And after about a year or a couple of years, that sense of I and me starts to grow, and because it's reinforced by the family and society and by its learning. And then it becomes the owner and controller of this body and mind. But actually, in truth, you know, the sense of I is an illusion, basically, because it was created within the mind, in the mind, for the mind, and by the mind. And basically, so it's the mind that's identified with all these objects that we like and dislike. So anyway, just kind of briefly, that is kind of an explanation of the 5 aggregate process. But this process is happening every moment of seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking. So this body has, we have the senses, we have eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and the skin. These are called the 5 physical senses. And then the mind is the 6th sense, because we can also notice mental images. Your ear can't notice a mental image. Your eye can't notice a mental image, and so on. So the mind has its own objects within it, memories, basically, and its emotions that it can cognize independently of the 5 physical senses. But normally they working together. But in the daytime, when you're active, then all every moment of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking is what is called a mind moment. And those aggregates come together and they will vanish instantly. But they're followed by another one very quickly. And so this process of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking basically is arising and vanishing within the mind at a speed faster than a supercomputer processes information. And that's why we cannot see this broken up process. And when we look out and we see all these things, our experience looks like just a smooth flowing experience. We look around the room and we see all these different objects and so on, and the sense of I appears to be real in that. But the sense of I arises with each of these moments of consciousness. But because we don't see them arising and vanishing, they're all run together because it's happening at such a high rate of speed. We don't see them arising and vanishing. So the illusion that the I is something permanent gets fixed in the mind. But really the mind works similar to a reel of film, a motion picture reel of film. So you all know that a motion picture reel of film is made up of individual frames with a little space in between. And so you have a whole roll of film in the old style before digital, the reel films. You run it through a projector with a light. And it's moving fast enough that you don't see the individual frames coming and going. But if that film is run on slow motion, then you can almost see those individual frames. I'm sure most of you have seen a movie film in slow motion. And you can almost see that like staccato-like effect of frames coming and going. Or an animation, Disney's animation, all these movies that they're making up. You can go to the theater and you see that, but each picture is just, they're made up of thousands of individual artists have drawn that on a page or a computer. Every different movement of, Donald Duck, moving its hand or, quacking or whatever, is an individual picture. But flashed very quickly, it looks like it is a continuous, image or action. So it basically, that's also an illusion. So the movie is an illusion of, made up of these individual moments or images that are arising and vanishing. So in the deepest level, that's how the conditioned mind is actually working. But again, it happens also quickly, and our mind is very dull. The average mind of people is dull and is very slow. And so it cannot see that process clearly. And therefore we get caught up and attached to all these objects when in reality, it's an illusory process that is arising in the mind. Now, I know it's very difficult for the average person to understand this. That's why most people will just say, oh, that's a bunch of hogwash or bunk or whatever, and they don't see the importance of it. But it's very important, especially in terms of our developing understanding, and it's important in understanding the nature, the deeper nature of suffering and how suffering arises based on the illusions of permanence and the illusion of self that most people are locked into. And so the process of meditation is the process of really focusing the mind inwards to begin to try to unravel that mystery of the mental process and to see it clearly, to see the reality of the mind as it really is. And that's one of the meanings of vipassana meditation, seeing reality as it is. And I'm going to talk more about that in some the next talks. But I just wanted to mention that. So the process of meditation really, the Buddha was like a scientist, and I like to always bring that analogy because the Buddha more or less had a scientific mind. He went around asking all these other people back in his day, all these meditation masters, teach me the truth, tell me the truth, this and that. And, none of them could adequately satisfy him. And so he said, why should I go around and asking everybody else? So he sat down under the Bodhi tree like a scientist and looked into his own body and mind and developed his powers of mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, and to develop his mind like a high-powered microscope. And the more he developed his one-pointed concentration and awareness without being distracted, the mind became very clear. And it was like turning up the power of the microscope and speeding up the rate of perception, that he could actually start to clearly see this process of impermanence or arising and vanishing within the consciousness, and how it was comprised of these just mind moments, and how the illusion of self and I and how attachments arose out of that. So he became a sort of an expert in seeing that. And basically that's what he taught us. So when we practice meditation, we especially those who are practicing mindfulness, and the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is the framework out of which vipassana meditation comes. When we sit down to meditate, we should have that idea of a scientist going into the laboratory. And this body is the laboratory, because it's within this body with its nervous system that the mind is operating. And so by focusing within the body as a starting point, we're able to more clearly, directly see the mind and the mental process, see this process of feeling, of vibration, feeling, perception, and our reactions, and even consciousness. So whenever you sit down to meditate, you should have the idea like a scientist going into the laboratory. And first, the scientist, if he wants to go in the lab, he has to find the door of the lab, right? So he comes to the door of the lab, but then he has to open the door. Then he has to go into the laboratory. So in the same way, when we sit down to meditate, we have to find the door of the laboratory. And that's the buttocks and feet pressing the ground, or the external physical body. That's the door of the lab. And so we developed that mindfulness. Oh yes, the sitting, or breathing, kind of feeling the external sensation of the body. How the legs are crossed, how the hands are touching, kind of feeling that outline of the body. That's the door of the laboratory. And as you keep your mind focused on it, you start feeling sensations under the skin, like little, pulsations or other sensations. Or you start focusing on the breathing, you feel the expanding and contracting of the breathing process. So that's gradually like opening the door of the laboratory and going inside, sort of getting under the skin when you start to feel more of those vibrations. And that's when you start focusing the attention like a microscope and turning up the power of the microscope to see this process. But we're going to talk more about that later, because I think I'm going to bring this Dhamma talk to an end, and then our guided meditation afterwards. Then I'm going to try to give you a guided meditation on, kind of approaching this or developing this kind of attitude. Okay, so if any of you have been writing down any questions, now I'll take a little time to try to answer some questions if anybody had any questions. So let's see. Somebody says somebody is popping up on the screen. I don't know, is that still happening? I don't see anybody popping up on the screen. Anyway. Okay, here's a question. When we die, excuse me, that's similar to the avocado story. Can one train the mind to go from feeling, pleasurable feeling, like from sensory input like chocolate, and get it to produce an unpleasant feeling? Well, if I did it for avocados, I was experiencing a painful feeling with the avocados. And through the practice of meditation and right understanding, I changed that pleasurable feeling to unpleasant feeling to a pleasurable feeling. So if you can do it in one direction, one could do it in the opposite direction too. What happened to your, if you had I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but you might have had some friends a long time ago, or an ex or something, and you might have liked them at one time. So you might have had a pleasurable feeling with them, and then it's turned into a painful feeling. And so, yes, one could do it, or through other times you could do that. And like a smoker, he has to get over that pleasurable feeling induced by smoke, and to see it as turn that into a painful feeling. So he would then stop that desire to, want to continue smoking or something else. So, yes, the Buddha said that's mastery of the mind. In order to change pleasurable feeling into painful feeling, or change painful feeling into pleasant feeling, that's called mastery of the mind, not being a slave to those things, but knowing how that can be changed if the situation warrants it. It's not mean you have to do that for everything, but only to the feelings that we have specific trouble with. We can change that. So, could you explain the difference between feelings and emotions? Well, in Western language, in English language, a lot of people equate a feeling with an emotion. That's because maybe in English language there isn't the clear, specific difference. But in the psychological language of the Pali, perhaps Sanskrit, there is a difference. And the emotions belong to sankhara. So the feeling is basically the pleasant or painful feeling. An emotion is more than a feeling. Emotion regards a memory that's connected with somebody, and it has it's more powerful, and it's harder to disconnect from. Although there is feeling within the emotion, but the emotion has more than just the plain feeling. In fact, the feeling can come first and the emotion come later. But it arises so subtly we may not be able to see the difference. And that's why you really have to practice, only through the practice of meditation and the development of mindfulness and concentration can a person be able to discern those subtle differences. This question is, Sanya and Panya are similar words. These are Pali words, perception and wisdom. Yeah, it's kind of difficult to understand that, but yeah, just practice more meditation, you'll understand the differences. If there is no self, who is the I in may I be well and happy and peaceful? Now, this is important to understand. Now, even though ultimately the sense of I is an illusion, still it's relatively real. It's relatively real. That means as long as we have a body and a mind, and as long as you are not an arhat, then you are going to still be under the influence to a certain extent of the I. And there's no harm in using it as long as you understand it. So we can use the conventional language of I and you and, you know, he and she and all this, but ideally we should understand that behind those words, ultimately, all these things are just have relative value. So, you know, as long as we're practicing meditation, sure, there's an I that wants to be free from suffering. Otherwise, none of you would be interested in meditation, probably. So it's the I that wants to become free from suffering. But as you go on practicing and you see the illusion of the I, but still we have to, we can still use those words but not be deluded by it. And until we attain the state of the arahant or complete liberation, we need that I as the motivation to practice. Otherwise we won't practice. So it's not, the I is not necessarily bad, but when you misunderstand it and you you cling to it, and then you want to use this I to, beat over other people or to boost up the ego and do other unwholesome, that's when it becomes out of control. So we have to understand both levels of truth, the absolute level of truth and the relative level, and we have to learn how to use and live within both of those levels. This question, can you please give your reflections on Kaya, Chitta, Viveka? We take too long to go into all that. Maybe we'll cover it in some other talks. So I think that's the end of these questions, good questions. So we're going to now take a minute or two to have a short break for you to stand up, maybe stretch your legs, or if you need to go to the restroom, or take a drink of water. And then for those who need to leave the meeting, you can. Those who are in Europe, it's getting very late at night and so on. You might be getting sleepy, so, but for those who want to stay on, then after a minute or two, we're going to come back and I'm going to lead you through a few standing exercises just to get the energy vibrations moving, and then to sit for a guided meditation, as I mentioned. Okay? So we'll go ahead and come back in a couple of minutes. Out breath 9. In breath 10. Out breath 10. Now discontinue the counting. Discontinue any controlling of the breath. Just let the breathing return to its own uncontrolled rhythm. But continue to follow it, feel it. Observe the subtler movement, sensations of the breathing process. And just mentally remember that this body is sitting and breathing here and now. Just remember just breathing in, sitting. Breathing out, sitting. Breathing in, letting go of the past and future. Breathing out, sitting here and now. Just coming to that door of the laboratory. Try to keep the feeling image of the breathing body in the front of the awareness. And the knowing of breathing in, sitting. Breathing out, sitting. Just try to notice how each breath is different. Sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. Sometimes you feel it more in the abdomen. Sometimes you feel it more in the rib cage, your chest. It's always changing. Just gradually opening the door of the laboratory, going inside to feel the subtler movements, subtler details of expanding and contracting. Try to notice the brief pause between the breaths. After the in-breath, there's a brief pause, maybe just a fraction of a second. And after the out-breath, there's a brief pause. It's important to notice the pauses. If you're aware of the pause, you'll be aware of the next out-breath or in-breath. The pauses connect each breath to the next one. It's the way that you develop a more continuous concentration. Normally our minds wander during the pause. During the pause, just feel the outline of the sitting body. Just breathing in the pause. Breathing out the pause. Just breath by breath, moment by moment. Just turning up the power of the mental microscope to notice subtler sensations of the breathing process, or other subtle sensations you might notice coming and going in and around through the breathing awareness. Little body movement, little itch, prickling sensation, touch of clothing against the skin. This can all be easily noticed while observing the breathing. It's going further inside the laboratory, sitting down at the microscope, focusing the attention down into the body, the breathing body. In, sitting. Out, out, sitting. And as you're feeling the breathing, you can also reflect as just the air element, the element of motion, one of the four elements. It's just a vibration, a certain vibration, you call it my breathing. That's a perception, a mental image. Try to cultivate that understanding that this body is just accumulation of so many different material vibrations. Breathing in, sitting. Breathing out, sitting. It's the ongoing, continuous connection to the present moment awareness. At the same time, be alert for thoughts arising in the mind. If you get caught up in thinking, recognize it as thinking. Gently let go of the thoughts. Take a deep, slow breath. Bring the mind back into the body to re-anchor it to the breathing body. If you hear any sounds in your house, just remember that or understand that as just the sound vibration. But if you recognize it as some object, know that as just a perception, the aggregate of perception. Or even if you identify any of your body parts, it's just a perception. My head, arms, feet. It's just a mental perception made out of material vibration. Just try to understand that. So be alert if there's any pleasant or unpleasant, painful sensations coming through your body or mind. Just recognize it as such, unpleasant feeling or pleasant feeling, not to get attached to it. Or if there's a perception with that feeling, understand the perception associated with the feeling. Breathing in, sitting. Breathing out, sitting. Thoughts come and go. Sounds come and go. Various sensations of pleasure or pain come and go. Emotions may come and go. Urges. The thought of me may come and go. Or the I, yourself. These are all just a continuous change and flow of material and mental vibration through the body and mind. It's cultivating the right understanding according to Dhamma. From time to time, take a few deep, slow breaths to re-energize the awareness. Keep that connection in the breathing body. Just keep turning up the power of the mental microscope to notice subtler and finer details, sensations in the body-mind process, the flow of impermanence. See if you can identify any of those 5 aggregates arising in your body or mind. Oh, that's the material vibration. That's a feeling. That's a perception. That's a sankhara reaction. That's the sense of me, I consciousness. Be a scientist. That's material vibration, that's feeling, that's perception, that's the mental reaction habit. That's ego consciousness. So constantly changing. Breathing in, sitting. Breathing out, sitting. An ongoing, continuous, present moment connection. This breathing body is the lifeline, the life preserver for this mind on the ocean of samsara. If we lose that connection to the breathing body, to the present moment, the mind gets easily pulled beneath the waves of greed, hatred, and deluded thoughts, worry, fear, anxiety. This breathing body is our only real anchor to the present moment. It's the vibrations of the body. And just continue to develop this mindfulness of the body. It's always there, literally just beneath your nose. Whether you're sitting, standing, walking, laying down, bending, stretching, eating. Those 5 aggregates are always just coming and going. Body vibrations, feelings, perceptions, reactive habits, emotions, the ego consciousness. It's not a fairy tale. It's not make-believe. Sabbi sankhara anicchati yada panyaya pasati atani bindati dukkhi Isamango visuddhiya. All conditioned things, the 5 aggregates of this body, mind, and world are impermanent. When one sees this with the eye of wisdom, one becomes disenchanted with suffering. This is the path to freedom. Now we want to switch our attention over in the last some minutes of the meditation to cultivating thoughts of metta or friendliness, best wishes toward our own body and mind, and radiating it outwards to others also. So just again, take a few more deep, slow breaths. And after breathing in, to hold the air in your lungs for several seconds and try to imagine and feel that oxygenated blood and life force being carried out to all the cells and tissues of your body, mind, nervous system. And feel that relaxing vibration on the out breath. Try to do that several more times and just imagine that oxygenated blood going out to all the cells as a kind of a healing vibration. Heal and tranquilize all the stress and tension in the body, mind, nervous system. Feeling more relaxed with each out breath. And that's like sending metta to your own body and mind. Doing deep, slow breathing is like sending metta, friendliness. Being friendly and kind to your body and mind that lives off of that oxygenated blood We normally don't breathe in very deeply. And just think along these lines to yourself as you're taking a few more deep, slow breaths. May I be well, peaceful, mindful, and wise. May I be free from the stress and worry, anxiety, pain and suffering of body and mind brought about by any unskillful thought, speech, and action. May I have the patience, strength, mindfulness, and wisdom to meet and overcome all difficulties in life. May I be able to continue to deepen my understanding of the Dhamma and practice meditation to help free the mind from confusion and suffering. May I be well, mindful, and wise. Then kind of reflect or send out these same kind of thought vibrations, metta vibrations to your any other family members, even if they've passed away, wherever they might be. You can send your thoughts to them. Or any living family members, relatives, good friends, your Dharma friends, others. Just sending these with each out breath. Just imagine those metta vibrations going out to them, your good vibrations, thought vibrations. May they all be well, peaceful, happy, and mindful. May they be free from worry, anxieties, stress, pain, and sufferings of body and mind brought about by their unskillful thought, speech, and action. May they also have the patience, strength, mindfulness, and wisdom to meet and overcome all difficulties in life. If they haven't already, may they also be able to hear the teachings of the Dhamma, to learn and practice meditation, to help free their minds from confusion and suffering. May they be well, peaceful, and mindful. And with each out breath, just continue to send out, radiate out these vibrations of metta, friendliness, best wishes toward all the ordinary folks out there in the world, especially in these couple of months who are going through all kind of worry, frustration, fear about losing their jobs, about death of their loved ones, or fear and other types of suffering. Just wishing that all of them could be well, happy, and peaceful, free from worry, fear, anxiety, greed, hatred, delusion. Wishing that they also have the patience, strength, mindfulness, and wisdom to meet and overcome all difficulties in life. And that they also have the opportunity to hear the teachings of the Dhamma, and to learn and practice meditation to help free their minds from confusion and suffering. May they be well, peaceful, and wise. And also, wherever you might be living, you might send out a couple out breaths full of metta vibrations to the mayors of your cities, the governors of your state, the president or chancellors of your country, the politicians who are making the decisions about starting work again or not, or controlling this pandemic problem. They have the wise counsel and equanimity and wisdom to make the proper decisions. May they be able to hear the teachings of the Dhamma, to practice meditation, free their minds from confusion and suffering. May they be well, peaceful, and wise. And just finally, just with a few last out breaths, just imagine these vibrations going out across the whole earth and even beyond, out into the atmosphere and the universe. Just with the idea that may all living beings, wherever they might be, visible or invisible, living far or near, large or small, weak or strong, may all living beings be well, peaceful, and wise. May all living beings be free from worry, fear, anxiety, pains, and sufferings due to their unmindful, negative thoughts, speech, and actions. May all beings be able to hear the Dhamma and practice meditation, to have the patience, mindfulness, wisdom to meet and overcome all difficulties in life. May all beings be able to live peacefully and harmoniously together, understanding the ultimate interconnectedness and interdependence of all things. May all beings be well, mindful, and wise. May all beings be well, mindful, and wise. Just like a mantra reverberating throughout space. Well, mindful, and wise. As we've done before, for those who like to finish this meditation, join me in chanting the simple word of sadhu 3 times slowly. We do it with the breathing. Take a deep breath and a long out breath through the chanting of the sadhu, and then breathing in again, repeating it 3 times. Sadhu. 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 And place your hands at the edge of your knees. On the next in-breath, stretch your head